Hello, 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 hello. Hello, everybody, ladies and gentlemen. John O'Keefe here. Look both ways. Jason Reynolds, look both ways. This way, that way, this way, that way, up and down, and all around. All we go. Good morning. It's great to see you. How are you? What a great day. Yesterday was a beautiful day. Today is a great day. Yesterday was a great day. The day before that was a great day. Tomorrow will probably be a great day for somebody, at least. Hello, John O'Keefe, Mr. O here, present, accounted for, and here with you. It is nice to see you today. Thank you so much for being present. I have been thrilled that this week we continue our adventure with Jason Reynolds. But at the same time, I also want to make sure that we are continuing to touch on the kind of topic of this week. The topic of this week has really been the idea of character and motivation, right? Like the idea of what motivates somebody to do something. What is the reason behind why they act the way that they do? And this is one of the concepts that I think a lot of people will run into as we discuss these stories, the idea of paying attention to not just the things that the author hands us, the things that he shows us or tells us about the person, like he's a jerk, or he was mean, or he smelled bad, or he looked funny. You know, those kinds of things are like what are called literal concepts. There are other things that you can use to help you understand the kind of person somebody is. Just like you do when you're hanging out in your classroom and a brand new kid comes through the door. You can look at them. They don't have to say anything, but you can get some general ideas based on your personal previous experience, as well as what's right in front of you. And you put those two things together and you begin to make your own kind of hypothesis as to who somebody is, right? Now, you can't look right at somebody in a book, but they give you a lot of clues that you can use. Like, how do they hold themselves? How does the author describe the way in which they are acting or the way in which they are moving? What do they say out loud when somebody says something to them? Are they angry? Are they frustrated? Are they always acting like spazoids? Or are they really quiet and everything is in low whisper? You know, and the important part is that will help us understand the kind of person that they are. Now, not only that, but also at the same time, you have to understand what's happening kind of around them. You have to kind of ask, what do they want? Who are these people? What are they working towards? What are they doing in this story? Usually you're introduced to your main character first. Not always, but most of the time, or somebody who's significant to the story, right? We obviously know that we are going to be probably in the same neighborhood. We might even have certain characters kind of float in and out that we've already met before, right? But in other cases, we are going to be introduced to somebody else, doing something else, wanting something. This is called motivation. So what we want to pay attention to is what is motivating, what is making from the inside out, what is making this character do what they do. By being able to determine that, when they act a certain way, you will either be like, yeah, see, because they were mean, they started stomping on the ground when they didn't get a piece of bubble gum. You know what I mean? Like, you're not surprised by that. But then other times, all the thoughts that you thought you had about something, or everything that the author at least gave you to begin with, gives you the concept of when they actually do something different, when they do something nice, when they do something surprising, you go, whoa, that wasn't what I expected. And then you have to kind of go back in your idea and say, why did I not expect that from them, right? So this is the idea of being able to use characters' motivation and what's happening in the story. What do they really want as being that thing? So as we begin today's story, no idea what today's story is. All I know is that it's going to be on Southview Avenue. I also see that there's the back end of a particular dog who we met. There's the back end of that car that we saw yesterday. We also see somebody, I think, standing on a gigantomous book. Are they barefoot? I don't know. Or they just have kind of small feet. Anyway, that's all we get. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Jason Reynolds, Southview Avenue, and every title, it's totally cool. Like, you do understand that, like, there's a map being built here, right? Like, there's maps. We hear different streets, and I haven't quite put it together yet, but it's weird. You get a page with a story or a street on it, and then you get the story, right? And this one's, look at the name of it. Try to say that word. Uka Buka Land. Uka Buka Land. Uka Buka Land. Uka Buka Land. I have no idea, but I do know that there was a book on the other side, and book is somewhere on the inside of that word. I don't know if that's what they're trying to get to. Gather, gather, gather round, ladies and gentlemen, leopards and giraffes, lollipops and gummy bears, lizard lips and googly eyes, and yes, even you, Mrs. Stevens. I am the super say-so, and I've come to make you laugh until you pass. Pass what, you ask? Pass gas? Pass out? Pass away? Pass anything other than class. Careful, Miss Stevens warned from her desk in the corner of the room. She sat with her arms folded, watching Cynthia say so. Sour put on a show in front of the class. This was the only way to keep Cynthia from disrupting and derailing the entire lesson. If Mrs. Stevens didn't give her these 5 minutes at the end, Cynthia would burst into some kind of sideways monologue about whatever Mrs. Stevenson had been teaching that day. Like how negative numbers deserve empathy because no one should ever feel lower than 0. I mean, wouldn't you feel a little negative too if people kept saying you less than nothing? You basically don't even really exist. You under. Your mama done probably kicked you out. Your girlfriend or boyfriend done broke up with you. And when you asked why, they just said something like, you ain't enough for me. So tell me, who's crying for the negative number? Who, Mrs. Stevenson? Who? Cynthia would wail and flail over dramatic fits in the air, all leading up into a big finish, Cynthia planting her face flat on the desk, cheek to wood. And right when Miss Stevens would think it was over, Cynthia would lift up and ask, you know what I would do if I was a negative number? There was only one answer. Cynthia, don't you dare, Miss Stevens warned, knowing what was coming. I would. One answer. The whole class knew it. Cynthia, seriously. Mrs. Stevenson shook her head. And because Miss Stevens shook her head, and because the whole class knew it, they joined in and said it with her. Run! Cynthia would jump up from her desk and charge out of the classroom, but only for a second. Then she'd come back in as if it never happened. Have a seat at her desk, straighten her posture, pick up her pencil with one hand, and play with the 2 plates surrounding from either side of her head, a hairstyle she loved for its comedic effect. With the other, Miss Stevens used to call out for her, used to stutter step toward the door, used to threaten to write her up. Don't divide me from the class, Mrs. Stevens. Please don't divide us, Cynthia would fake beg, doubling down on the math joke. Oh, I'm not planning on doing any division, Cynthia. I'm thinking more along the lines of subtraction. But Mrs. Stevens never did. Truth is, she liked Cynthia's jokes. It reminded her of old comedians on the black and white TV shows her grandmother used to watch when she was a child. So she cut the goofball a little deal. If Cynthia would be attentive and serious all class, she would give the last 5 minutes for her to do her thing. So L's and G's, let's start with the news. This just in, shirt is a strange word, right? I mean, seriously, there had to be better options when it came to naming. This, Cynthia tugged at the collar of her t-shirt. I heard, and this is just what I heard a long time ago. There was this dude who was a clothes maker, and he invented this thing to cover your chest and arms and stuff. Now, when he first made it, he called it an arm belly chest cloth, but that name was too long. So then he shortened it to an ABC. But then the ABCs came out, and that became a whole other thing and a song and the cool LMNOP part. And the next thing he knew, Everybody was doing it. And then the clothes maker realized maybe ABC wasn't the best name to call his arm, belly, chest cloth, but he ain't have another name for it. One night, he was sitting with a friend. No, not one friend, a bunch of his friends at a dinner, and everybody's trying his arm, belly, chest cloth thing, right? And the clothes maker is nervous because people love it, and they keep asking him what's it called. And when he tells them, their face drops like they can't believe it. That's too long of a name. We call shoes, shoes, not toe cover-uppers, they said. Now, see, the clothes maker was a nervous eater. I forgot to tell you all that part. Every time he got stressed out or like anxious, he would eat. And now he was nervous because everyone was saying his garment wouldn't work unless he changed the name. So what are you going to change it to? They asked. And instead of responding, he just started stuffing bread in his mouth. Bread, 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 just pushing it in there. What are you going to name it? They repeated. And do you know what the clothes maker said with a mouthful of rolls? Pause for effect. I'll tell you what he said. Cynthia wound up. The clothes maker shrugged and said all muffled, shirt, I don't know. And before the ruckus could even come, Mrs. Stevens shut it all down. Okay, that's enough for today, she said, trying not to laugh herself. There was no need to cut Cynthia off anyway, because the punchline landed at the exact moment that the bell rang. Man, she's good. I like Cynthia. I'd like to cut a deal with a young lady named Cynthia in my classroom who wanted to take the last 3 minutes of class to tell a great story like that. Appropriate, somewhat inappropriate, but at the same time appropriate. I got to cheer that on. Bravo, Cynthia. Now, have you been thinking a little bit about their motivation might be? You've been thinking about what her motivation might be? Attention? Popularity? Being seen? Being heard? But the great thing is does she cut the deal? Does she stay quiet all class period in order to get those last few minutes of her own? She does. So she's smart too. See what I'm saying? Right now, we've got a smart kid who's funny, creative, talkative, thoughtful, flies fast, tight. Cynthia's mother worked all day and went to school all evening. When Cynthia was a baby, her mother would rock her to sleep with bedtime stories read out of night school textbooks. She was Cynthia's hero, a hero too busy to save her, a hero too hardworking even to find time to laugh, but a hero nonetheless. But Cynthia's grandfather was her superhero, not in the superhuman sense, but in the way that there was something incredible about him, at least to Cynthia. To almost everyone else, he was just the wild ex-soldier who owned the liquor store right in front of her apartment building, the kind of man who would take a wooden crate, flip it upside down, then step up on it and put on a show. Hold court right there in the middle of the store. Jokes were his superpower. The dirtier, the better. Cynthia was even named after him. His name was Cinder. And whenever he introduced himself to people, they'd always ask, Cinder, like Cinderella? And he'd say, no, Cinder, like a cinder block. But really, he was a bit of both. He had a toughness to him, a hard-headed, hard-handed, hard-talking man. But he was also soft enough to hold baby Cynthia and stare at her and laugh like she was the greatest joke ever told. Soft enough to know how good sidekicks will be when he saw one. Get what a sidekick is? Like if you're going to be the superhero, you always got to have that secondary, that person who's going to be the backup. And did you hear what he just said? He knew that from the minute he met Cynthia when she was younger. Soft enough to know a good sidekick when he saw one. Soft enough to give her a nickname. Sweetie Say-So. Named her that because of all the goo-goos, gagas, and grunts Cynthia would make whenever Cinder would pick her up. A noisemaker. Always a noisemaker. And Cinder would just salute her and say, sweetie, if you say so. If you say so, sweetie. Cinder's girlfriend, a gray-haired, lipsticked, cigarette-smoking male woman named Miss Fran, would always come by his store to deliver letters and bills, always catching him in the middle of his jokester routines. She'd laugh in this way and made all the bottles in his store rattle. Made all the men jealous of the love thing she and Cinder had. And when she came on Saturdays, she'd always catch Cynthia marching around outside the front of the store, prompted by her grandfather, and Miss Fran would stick stamps on Cynthia's chubby cheeks and forehead. "I'm gonna put you in the mailbox, ship you off to Ooka Land," she teased, and Cynthia would laugh and scream, "No!" as if Ooka Land were a real place. Miss Fran died when Cynthia was 7. Hurt Cynthia to lose the only grandmother she'd ever known, but her sadness was nothing compared to Cinder's. Seemed like Cinder's mind floated away with Miss Fran's spirit and voice. Or maybe it went underground with her body, buried in the cemetery across the street from the liquor store. Cinder could see her gravestone from the window of the 4th floor unit he and Miss Fran had lived in together, 5 doors down from where Cynthia lived with her mom. It wasn't long after Miss Fran's death that Cinder closed the liquor store. It wasn't long after the store closed that it was knocked down. It wasn't long after it was knocked down that the apartment complex built a playground where it used to be, a sliding board, a set of swings, a seesaw, a stage. Not a big, elaborate stage, just a concrete platform about the size of the wooden crates Cinder used to stand on in the store. A bronze plaque bolted to it that read, "Cinder's Block." Cynthia hoped that maybe he'd step up on it someday, crack a joke or two, but he never would, because it wasn't long after the store was turned into a playground that Cinder started to forget things. How to turn on the radio, how to work the microwave. And every time something simple would slip in his mind, Cynthia would have to come over to help. "Remind me how to turn the TV on, say so. Don't seem to want to work for me," Cinder would say, pointing to the case he kept his eyeglasses in at the television screen. It wasn't long after Cinder started to forget things that Cynthia and her mother moved down the hall into her grandfather's 2-bedroom apartment. Cinder had his room, and Cynthia and her mother had the other, which meant most nights, because her always exhausted mother slept like a woman fighting a bear, Cynthia slept on the couch, dreaming of the day that she would make her mother laugh, dreaming of the day that she could funny her mother free of all the work, of all the stress she seemed to wear in her face, like thick makeup the wrong color for her skin. Dreaming of her mother telling her a joke, "Knock, knock." And Cynthia would reply, "Who's there?" And her mother saying, "Me." And Cynthia not having to say, "Me who?" That's all Say So ever wanted. A love thing with her mother. The way her grandfather had with Miss Fran, through the laughter. And since the mother was too busy to break, well then, anyone would have to do. A smile is a smile. A hop is a hop. So every day, she'd rattle off her jokes at the end of class, bathing in her classmates' crack-ups, including today. Pause. So what's her motivation? She doesn't get the laughs at home because her mom is too busy. Grandfather's starting to forget things. But she is somebody like her grandfather who needs the laughter, who needs the attention, who needs that. There's nothing wrong with that, right? It's part of her character. It's who she is. The thing I like is that Miss Stevens gives her that time. Miss Stevens gives her that space. Miss Stevens gives her what she needs. And because of that, cause and effect. She listens for all the class, right? And she's pretty smart. She's paying attention. She's making good choices. She just wants more. Her greatest dream of all? Knock, knock. Who's there? Me. And not have to say me who, because she knows it's her mama, right? Let's find out what happens today. Why is today the day that Jason Reynolds brings us to Ooka Land, right? Remember, that's the name of this thing. We did have a minute with Miss Fran as well, so I'm not quite sure what's going on. Including today. As everyone rushed out of Mrs. Stevens' class, Cynthia stood at the door handing out flyers. Not the kind that are professionally printed with graphics and lasers and cool shadow effects. These were just pieces of lined notebook paper, ripped into squares with soggy edges because she believed in the lick and rip method. That said, written in red, "Say So live on Cinder's Block at the Southview Apartment Show starts at 3:33. Be there or be Miss Fantana's forever wedgie." I gotta say that. That's funny. Be there or be Mr. Fantana's forever wedgie. Mr. Fantana's a teacher, right? Cynthia teased. She didn't know where that one came from, but she let it loose and let it live. Down the hall she went, stopping at her locker, grabbing her things, and heading for the door, pausing only to tell her friend Gregory Pitts that he smells like his last name. She told him this every day, just because. Just because. And Greg, knowing it was a joke, flapped his arms like a bird, wafting the pit funk toward her. 3:33, she called out to him. Be there. When she got outside, instead of taking the long way she usually took and walked the way most of the walkers went, which was up to the corner where Miss Post was, orange vested, waving cars by, blowing her whistle until her face looked like it would pop, Cynthia walked through the grass and headed around the back of the school to take the shortcut. She could have gone through the back door, which would have been an even shorter cut, but then she would have missed snapping on Greg. And who would have avoided the opportunity to roast someone? Plus, she'd learned from her grandfather a long time ago how important tradition was. She walked along the side of the school, dragging her fingers on the red brick of the building until she read the line of trees, until she reached. Dragging her fingers on the red brick of the building until she reached the line of trees at the back. Not exactly a forest, just a single line of maples that created a barrier between the school and the road. When Cynthia reached the tree line, the trees thick with limbs that looked less like arms and more like outstretched legs, thick-rooted yoga trees, she hiked her jeans up above her ankles and tiptoed, because the land seemed to always be muddy there. On the other side of the trees was Kerrigan Street, known for nothing besides the entrance to the Southview Cemetery. The cemetery had a regal iron gate wrapped around it, and it took up the entire block. Cynthia, after looking both ways, title of the book, ran across the street and into the cemetery because through the graveyard was the shortest way home. No point in going around when she could go through. Plus, she had to get giggles for her grandfather. Giggles were cigarette butts. Cinder collected them, and Cynthia always tried to make sure to find some if she could. People were always walking through the cemetery, smoking and leaving their leftover cigs on the ground, and sometimes even leaving them on the gravestones along with flowers, pictures, notes, bottles, and candles. But the giggles were what she was looking for, what Cinder always wanted. But he hadn't named them that. Cynthia named them giggles. Shortly after Miss Fran died, Cynthia was helping her grandfather clean the apartment, helping him organize the papers and clothes, helping him straighten up. You want this? She asked, holding up an old Vietnam veteran's hat. Uh-huh. These? Cynthia asked, holding up a stack of stamps and envelopes. I ain't mailing nothing, so nah, Cinder said. Cynthia peeled one of the stamps from the book, stuck it on her forehead, then made a funny face at her grandfather. He smiled, and she put the rest of the stamps in her back pocket. What about this? Then she said, holding up an ashtray full of cigarette butts, red lipstick smudged on the tips. Red lipstick smudged on the tips. These are memories for Fran, right? They're gross because they're cigarette butts, but they're memories. Let's see what happens. I'm going to infer, and I'm going to predict that he's going to want to keep them. Because Cynthia is telling us a story about picking up giggles in the cemetery for him. Ones without red lipstick. You know what I'm saying? He looked, leaned into the ashtray, kind of looked like he was leaning over the edge of a pool, threatening to fall in. He picked one up, looked at it like he was looking at a single bullet, one that could explode his heart, but it didn't. At least not in the way Cynthia thought. Cinder's eyes began to water. But he didn't cry. He giggled. Cynthia traipsed around the cemetery looking for giggles, finding none. There were people walking their dogs through the graveyard, others visiting their family members, sweeping their areas, picking up trash, replacing dead flowers with live ones. Cynthia saw two girls sitting on a skateboard in front of a tombstone. She thought she'd recognize them, but didn't want to stare because it would have been weird. She kept walking, kept looking, eyes running across the tops of the stones that had last names engraved in them. But she was running out of time. It was 3:26, 7 minutes until the say-so show. So she figured she may have struck out this time. She may not have any new giggles to give her grandfather. But then she came to Miss Fran's grave, and sitting on top of it was a cigarette butt. Lipstick kissed the end of it. Cynthia took it as a sign, slid it into her pocket, and headed on. After she came out of the other end of the cemetery, the Southview Avenue side, she crossed the street over to where the playground was. There was a little girl sitting on a swing, kicking her legs, flying back and forth, static electricity for hair, happiness for a face. That's pretty today. Thank you. Flying back and forth, static electricity for hair, happiness for a face. That's a beautiful line. Thank you, Jason Reynolds. But she was the only person there, and it was 3:31 p.m. Cynthia sat on Cinder's block, stretched to crack her back. The couch seemed to be making her body old, and when she thought about it, it made her laugh. I bet the reason a couch is called a couch is because of the ouch part, she said to herself. Or maybe to the swinging girl, but the swinging girl was swinging and not listening. Yeah, that's not a good one. 3:32 p.m. A bird landed next to her, a pigeon, a dingy gray that was still somehow beautiful, like clouds before rain. Yeah, I always wing it anyway, she said to the bird. I wonder what it must be like you, what it's like to be you. It's like you got wings so you can fly anywhere you want to go, which is pretty much the most amazing thing ever. You can fly to the things you want, but the letdown is that when you get to wherever the things you want are, you ain't got the hands to grab it. That one made her laugh a little. 3:33 p.m. No one came. But no one ever came. Well, that's not true. Sometimes Gregory Pitts, Remy Vaughn, Joey Santiago, and Candace Green would come, but that's just because they lived in Southview too. Cynthia figured her low attendance was because people had to go home after school, parents, practice, homework, stuff like that. Either that or they never thought she was being serious about her shows. That whole 3:33 thing was just part of her act, part of the joke, part of the say-so thing. And so they all were thinking, yeah, okay, if you say so, right? Of course. Truth was, 3:33 was for Cynthia's mother. She got off work as a barista at 3 and had school, now graduate school, at 4:15. She always went straight to class, but if for some reason she decided to skip, to take the day off, to give herself a break, Cynthia would be right there, standing on Cinder's block, ready to joke a smile onto her hero's face, just the way her superhero had taught her to do. But there are no days off for a hero. So Cynthia opened up her backpack, pulled her notebook out, and snatched a page loose. She dug out a pen and started scribbling a joke about the bird and it not having hands and how awesome it would be to have wings if you also had hands. But then you'd make birds angels and how that would be way too scary to see angels with beaks. That made her laugh too. Cynthia then pulled out an envelope and a stamp. She kept them in a small pocket in the front of her bag. She folded the paper, slid it into the envelope, sealed it, then wrote her own address on it. After that, she slapped the stamp on it. She peeled another stamp from the book and walked over to the little girl on the swing. Want a sticker? Cynthia asked. Little girl stopped swinging, held her hand out. Cynthia stuck the sticky square on the back of it. Charlie Chaplin, a good comedian. When she got upstairs to her apartment, Cynthia dropped her bag on the couch and beelined it to her grandfather's room. Knocked. Grandpa, I got mail. No answer. Knocked again. Grandpa, it say so. Mail. Nothing. Concerned, Cynthia turned the knob, opened the door slowly. Grandpa? He was there, sitting on the table, sitting on the side of his bed, scribbling in his notepad. Paper balls littered the floor, so many that the door swept a bunch of them to the side of the room. That wasn't unusual. There were always paper balls, most with random sentences on them, starts and stops. His hands holding a pen, spitting whatever was coming from his sputtering mind, but a few were not in his handwriting. A few had been snatched from envelopes written in the loopy cursive of the coolest granddaughter in the entire world. Grandpa, you hear me knocking? Cynthia asked. Cinder looked up at her, and for a moment it seemed like he didn't recognize her. Finally, oh, say so. I didn't hear you. In here trying to get my jokes together, trying to write a zinger for you to take to school tomorrow, you know? Cynthia came to his side, kissed his cheek, looked around at the paper. All he had written down was the word eardrums. Eardrums, huh? Yeah, it's not working. He ripped it out, balled it up, tossed it on the floor. I got something else I think is better, but I don't know. Anyway, how was school? I killed. You did the shirt joke? Yep, and crushed it. Ah, your mother used to love that joke. His voice sweetened for a moment, then he continued. Your teacher ain't get mad, did she? No, she was cool about it. Cynthia reassured him, remembering the cigarette butt in her pocket. Oh, hey, I almost forgot. I found a giggle. She pulled the red stained tip from her pocket, dropped it in his palm. Cinder let it roll around, staring down at it for a while before smiling. He got up from bed and dropped it into a bottle on the small table a few feet away, adding it to what looked like 100, maybe more. Some mail came for you. Cynthia held the envelope out, the one that she'd stuffed with the paper that she'd written the bird joke on, the one that she'd simply written her own address, which was his address on, nothing else. Grandpa took the envelope, set it on the table. Cynthia knew that later he would open it, read it, then forget he'd read it, and believe he wrote it. And the next day, he'd tell her to try a new joke in Mrs. Stevenson's class, and she'd tell him she would, then come home and tell him his jokes were working. His jokes were still cracking people up, and he'd say things like, we a good team, ain't we? Or, like father, like daughter. And Cynthia would kiss his cheek and nod. Cynthia headed back toward his bedroom door. Before leaving, she turned and asked, what was the other thing? Cinder looked confused. So Cynthia continued, the joke. You said you were thinking about something else. Oh, just this thing I'm kicking around. But I don't think it'll work. What was it? Tell me. All right. Cinder steadied himself, looked his granddaughter in the eye. What would happen if a school bus fell from the sky? Cynthia thought for a second, a smile creeping onto her lips. I mean, is it coming from Ookabuka land? Silence. Just that thought between them. Cynthia looking at her grandfather, her Cinderella, her cinder block, the man who taught her to perform, taught her that life is funny most of the time, and the times it ain't funny are even funnier, and there ain't no forgetting that. He looked back at her, and in the way that only a grandfather and granddaughter could do, together Cynthia and Cinder split open and laughter poured out of them, a laughter free enough to make the bottle of giggles on the table rattle. Chestnut. No, I'm sorry. What road was that? What was that? What was that? What was the road? What was the road? Oh, man. Southview Avenue, across from the cemetery. Through the cemetery is the school. Grandpa's cinder block is that thing that she was standing on. It wasn't a book. What's her motivation? Her mama's busy. Her mama's always busy. Her mama has gone from being a barista to school, to graduate school, which means she is getting an education. There is goodness in that, right? She's making a good life, but mama ain't around right now. Grandpa's starting to get forgetful. Who wrote the story about the shirt? Cynthia. Learned it from her grandpa. Boy, I like Cynthia a lot. I'd like Cynthia to tell stories in my classroom. I would love to have Cynthia say that every day at 3:30 she was going to do a presentation on Cinder's block. But nobody shows up because nobody's not sure. Would you show up? Would you show up at least once a week? Probably get bored, right? Probably be like, yeah, I've been there before. Sounds lonely. But sounds like she keeps herself going. She doesn't let it get her knocked down. She does it every day, 3:33. Why? because she's waiting there to make sure that she tells a joke to her mama if her mama ever stopped working. Perseverance. Gosh, there's so much in that story, isn't there? I like Southview Avenue. I'm not going to tell you. I'm just, every one of these stories, every one of these little tiny stories seems to build into something that I want to know about, but something that I had not expected in any way, shape, or form, right? Well, anyway, we're here. You're here. I'm grateful for you. And it's time, man. It's time. It's time for me to roll. It's time for me to say goodbye. I'm hoping that maybe you'll join me tomorrow. We've got more adventure ahead, and I'll look forward to maybe talking to you tomorrow. Live like Cynthia. Find out how to laugh and find out those secret little things that you have between you and your family members. Maybe not a family member, but maybe somebody real close by. Hopefully you have that person. Hopefully you have people. Because like I'm learning from this, we don't get to last forever. So we want to spend all the time that we can celebrating each other. So I just want to say thank you very much for being here. I want to thank you for being present. I want to thank you for sharing this time with me. And I think I've said enough. I hope you have a wonderful day. I hope you learn something amazing. And I hope you come back. Have a great day. And I love you. I get out of here. Peace.